Hello, everyone, and welcome to Evolving Enneagram's Interspiritual Podcast. I'm Rev Nhien, founder of Evolving Enneagram, and I am so excited that we are in this Transformation by Type interview series in which I'm interviewing Enneagram professionals from around the globe, not about their teachings, professional practice, but about their personal and spiritual practice. So I am delighted to be chatting today with Catherine Bell, who is the founder of the Awakened Company. She's based in Canada and who identifies as an 8. But that's all I'll say about that for now. And I'll let her talk about her journey herself. But I do want to start by just introducing her based on how I met her. And we have technically, so full disclosure, Catherine and I have not actually met in person, not yet, but it feels like it because it's been a few years now during COVID when many people met online. And I met Catherine through her very thoughtful request to post on our Evolving Enneagram Facebook group. That's my understanding of how we met. And I just thought that was so precious because most people just go ahead and post and then I delete it or I sent but it was just such an amazingly sweet exchange. And then from there, of course, I was delighted by what she was posting, which is a lot of events where she was partnering with Russ Hudson to teach on the Enneagram and creativity. Maybe we'll get to hear a little bit about that today. But most of all, because of our Facebook connection, I got to experience Catherine really feeling your heart over the internet. It was just such a palpable thing because with many 8s, yeah, we feel your presence, but there was something about how just from the outset, I was like, who is this person? Your heart is shiny and on your sleeve. And so I'm grateful for this time to get to know you. So with that, I'll just invite you in to say hi.
Yeah. Well, hello, and a huge thank you for your work and everything you're doing for the world, to benefit the world, to help human beings become more real human beings. I totally appreciate it. And I'm also very excited to actually meet you in person very soon. So that to me is really, really important because the physical, seeing somebody in real life, even on Zoom, another aspect of you, another essence of you is coming through for me. And now I can only imagine what it's going to be like in real life. And so I just am so grateful for what you're doing and also for having me on your podcast. So thank you.
So amazing to have you here. Luscious is the word that I would, luscious. So let's start. I would love to start by hearing about your Enneagram journey. We'll start there and we'll see wherever it goes. But how did you meet the Enneagram? What did it do to you? Yeah.
So right now I'm at the cottage and I met the Enneagram a few hundred meters from where I am now when my aunt, who was working in the UK for an executive search firm called Korn Ferry, and she had been studying the Enneagram through that. And she and my mother were talking about it. And they said, Catherine Ruth, you're an Enneagram Type 8. Because you basically, as soon as you were born, I was quite bossy, very independent. I would de facto fill leadership voids. I just couldn't, if there was a leadership void, I would just fill it. And at the time I was like, oh, you're not going to box this energy in. There's no way you can, no, you can say whatever you want, but I am me and whatever you want, blah. I didn't care. And then my aunt, who as I was mentioning to you, who is an Enneagram, or was, she unfortunately has passed, was an Enneagram Type 3, has been a real role model for me for my entire life. She's an author. She was a business leader. She was an executive coach. And gradually the Enneagram just kind of wore itself into me and became a huge part of my learning, my journey, and it's had a huge impact on how I live my life.
Wow. Wow. That's huge. Yeah. So you were basically first confronted with the Enneagram. That's right.
Well, you can imagine your mother, your aunts, like huge
It's almost
influencers.
like an intervention. It sounds like no, so no.
I feel like I'm almost grown up in the work because of them, because
Interesting.
they were both, my mom is still here. She's
Oh,
80 and she's still so contemplative. She prays every day. Like I was brought up in kind of this warmth, this energy of love.
mm,
And it's had a huge impact. So confronted, yes, because they made me more loving, gosh
yeah.
darn it. Like they made me, I think they really softened the edges of my 8.
Mm,
If I wasn't brought up in such a, a gorgeous ocean of love and compassion and reflection and contemplation, I think I'd be a lot harder than I am now. So
wow.
I just have huge gratitude for my mom and my dad and my my aunt Ruth. Just huge gratitude for opening up that portal. And my aunt said to me, she said, you need to study with Russ Hudson. That's the person you need to study with. And so and since then I've hosted, I hosted David Daniels, Tom Condon, Ginger Lapid Bogda, David and Catherine Faber, all in Canada. And so I went and studied with Ross in California, and it was game over. It
Wow.
then almost like infiltrated my entire life, my entire being, and
Mm,
really became a portal for my spirituality.
mm. Yeah, what an amazing journey. I'd love to hear, was there anything specific in the first like descriptions of 8 that like moved you?
Well, first off, I really didn't like it.
Yeah.
Like I was just
Those are the ones I want to hear. Okay. So, so
like really, can I really, so I'll explain it this way. It's almost like I have a low burner on all the time in my belly center.
mm,
My anger goes up or down,
mm,
and my whole body goes red sometimes. Like it actually feels like it's flames, it's fire. And so this anger piece and control piece, it really, really describe me so accurately. So while some people may struggle with depression or melancholy, or I actually really have to work on my anger.
yeah.
And so seeing that in myself was like, oh, did not want to see it. I did not want to. And I think when you really find your type, I really wanted to hide.
Yeah.
I found it just like horrifying. I didn't really see the high side at the time. I just saw like, oh my goodness, this is me, and I can be really brutal, and my honesty and my bluntness can be really painful. I don't mean it to be, and it's almost like I have a sword, like a sword on my side, and if I really want to get angry with someone, I can just slice them up, and that's not who I really want to be. Yet I have such powerful access to that. So for me, it's how do I transmute that anger into love?
Mm,
Like, so an example of that, when I was really angry with what was happening politically with women.
mm,
And so I need to do something to pour fuel on the anger. So to feel the anger and to transmute it into something loving and something good. So based on that, I started a not-for-profit called the Awaken Company, which helps female entrepreneurs who are underprivileged learn how to start their own businesses through microcredit. And we've helped a number of people. We're having a big event called Undressing Leadership this fall for that. So for me, it's a transmutation of my Bunsen burner that's always going, of how do I transmute that. And occasionally I get flashes of just, I blurt out something that I wish I could like pull back, because I don't want to damage or
yeah.
hurt the relationships.
Yeah, wow, profound. So earlier you were describing anger and its sensations and its color in your body. I mean, to me, that's already a pretty high level awareness, right? Like you're not just having the anger, like there's a relationship to where you can witness the anger. I would love to hear your journey around that. Like how, I mean, because, there might be aides who were like, well, I got anger. Well, how do you transmute it? Right? Like, how did you begin to transmute it? It sounds like witnessing is part of that process. And what else? Yeah.
Mm, what a great question. What a fabulous question. Uh, so for me, I have an amazing group of friends who will call me out on it. So not only the self-awareness, rather having people who you trust who will say, oh, what's going on right now? Because I can see the anger. And then when I get any type of feedback like that, it flips the switch. I have so many spiritual practices um, that have really helped me to turn the switch on anger. And like right now, for over the last year, I've been doing a Dakini Nundro, and it's really helped me having the spiritual discernment to sit every day, do the Nundro, and it in itself has been incredibly, incredibly clarifying for my being. I just feel radically, I feel so much freer, so much more alive, so much more compassionate, and so much more loving as a result of doing the sitting practice. And there's contemplations with it, and just having that time and space um, to be with it, to be with the practice.
Yeah.
And I think if I were on autopilot or on default, the practice doesn't allow that to happen, because my default is to be in the world, to make stuff happen, to energetically it's out.
Yeah.
Whereas this practice causes me to come back home and
Wow.
what is actually here.
Mm.
And how do we embody a Dakini? How do we be with our divine feminine energy?
Mm. Mm. Lovely. Yeah. So I am not at all familiar with that practice, and I'm guessing others listening might not be either. I would love to hear. I mean, clearly it sounds like there's a contemplative aspect to the practice, where your default energy that moves up and out, that's being invited into a different direction, right? This sounds like invited into a kind of interiority. I would love to hear more about this, any specifics about the practice that you might share. Yeah, yeah. So is it daily? Is it, it's sitting?
Yes,
Yeah.
it's every day, it's sitting, it's I was taught it by Lama Alioni and Tuko Uso, and I also have a woman by the name of Lopen Charlotta Rotterdam,
Mm.
who they're my mentors and leaders in this, and it was really important for me to have feminine spiritual leaders. Now I know it really does, we're all the feminine and the masculine. I just think that I haven't seen enough females as female leaders in the spiritual realms. So I went to them, and in fact one of my mentors guided me to go to one of their retreats, and since then I've been absolutely hooked. And the practice is sitting every day with very specific practices. I have a bell and a drum and mala. And I was brought up in the Christian tradition, although my mom, it was very spiritually open. And I think that that's a way I describe me. And I was speaking to Charlotte about it. I'm like, do you believe that all spiritual practices lead to the same ocean? And she said, yes. And I believe that to be true. And this practice, which is Dzogchen Vajrayana practice, is, I'd say it's transformed my life. Like I found my voice in a new way. I found my senses in a new way. I've gotten in touch with myself in a new way. I've gotten in touch more with the feminine in a different way.
The feminine in you.
The feminine in me, and also
you.
the feminine in everybody. Like, and I see it more, and I feel this kind of receptive energy just coming on stream.
Mm.
And the Enneagram was really a portal, and interesting because there's a link between Gurdjieff and Buddhism. So, right, these things are not mutually exclusive. They're all interconnected and intertwined.
Yeah.
And it's just had such a positive impact on my life, and with my kids, my family, my friends, my colleagues. And I work a lot with Russ, and he does Diamond Heart, and I have my Dzogchen Vajrayana tradition, and it's amazing the similarities and the differences, and how everything is just related to how do we be more, and how do we be more human and more complete as a human being. So how do I become more complete? How do I see the missing parts of me to become more whole? And the 8, of course, more naturally masculine energy, like my energy's out, and and the practice has really taught me to be more receptive, to almost find my 5, 4, and 9 in this. And how do I listen more fully? How do I smell more fully? How do I taste more fully? How do I use my inner sight, my outer sight, my inner hearing, my outer hearing, and all of the different senses? It's just been such an amazing journey. And the Enneagram was a portal.
Yeah, I want to hear more about what that means for you, that the Enneagram was a portal into this, like, more, what it sounds like to me is a more nuanced experience of self and of life, right? There's like a subtlety in what you were describing. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. When I understood I was a type 8, and I call it my Enneagram DNA. So, like, we have all of it within us. However, I definitely had different dimensions of every type. So, for example, I have a lot of 7 and a lot of 2. And understanding I didn't have a lot of certain other energies. So it was like, okay, how do I get in touch with that? How do I explore that? How do I be with that? Interestingly, some very small birds just landed on the banister, like, and they've tilted their heads almost like they're listening in on what we're talking about. And that's another thing about the Enneagram is, I think, what is our inner journey with the Enneagram? What's our outer journey with the Enneagram? And what is the secret journey with the Enneagram? And there's so much to be explored. I don't think there's so much for us to learn about it. And it unravels. And I would say it has unraveled me in ways, in very unexpected ways.
Wow. Yeah. So your relationship to anger perhaps has unraveled some. What else has unraveled?
So other things that have unraveled me is just, I also study astrology and numerology, and understanding that at the root of things, I'm actually very, and this would surprise a lot of people, I'm very hermetic. Like, I have this very hermit. I have this very kind of, I have a high need to recharge, to be alone. And I'm actually at my best when I've had a significant amount of time in nature by myself, contemplating things rather than being out in the world. It's almost like I just have my little candle and I'm holding it, and I'm hoping people understand where I'm coming from. And when I think of, like, writing The Awakened Company, it was written in 2015 and it was re-released this year. And in many ways, it was written before its time. And I think that's the nature of almost the 8, is we see things before they happen, and then they happen, and we're like, well, I talked about this so much longer ago. Why didn't people get it? That's so 8. So I think for me, just to keep on knowing that vision, that leadership has a place, and that it's best. I'm a better leader and a better human being when I keep on coming back home with my little candle, spending time in nature, recharging, and then I can be in the world more fully. However, the ego, our ego gets rewarded all the time for being more in the world than in contemplation, etc. And so my ego desires of being in control, feeling powerful, all of those things, those happen when I'm in the world, versus really I'm most powerful when I'm inside myself, and the most powerful insights come to me when I'm alone. So knowing that softness, that sweetness of just tending to that hermit in me. So numerologically, I don't know if you do numerology or not, but like I'm a 9, so I like have this little candle, and I think everybody should figure out their life path and everyone should kind of begin to investigate their astrology. The ancients used the stars and the earth to become more fully human. So how do we apply that now? And I think in so many ways we've stopped doing that. And it's time to bring it back, because it will help to inform us to live better lives.
Well, you've touched on so many topics. I could just see them branching out and us having multiple podcasts interviews already. So we're going to try to stay grounded in like 1 or 2 lines of thought, but I hear a few things when you talked about tending. As you were talking about it, the word that was already coming to me for you in this space, for you, not just like from you and for you, was tenderness. No, that there's a tenderness. I mean, how many 8s talk about us, like the flamethrower 8 versus here's my candle. Like there's a tenderness in that appreciates. You talk about appreciation of the feminine, that appreciates a different way of having impact, that power that it reinterprets. I mean, not I don't like the polarities, well, that are like not that, but it's that and this, that outer exterior power, that power that can break and destroy, but also the power that cultivates, is what I hear in your sharing, the power that is subtle, that here is this precious little candle, right? Versus a flamethrower. And we can have both. So, it's about skillful means, right?
Yes, it's about skillful means. And there's a time for that flamethrower. Like, I think our systems of old, it's time for them to go. So how do we, it's in the moment, which tool do we most need to use? And having access to that. However, if we're only going by our one Enneagram type, that's not our full humanity. That's not my full humanity. If I just flamethrower, like fire breathing dragon, like I really relate to the Egyptian goddess Sekhmet. And they had to make her drunk on beer for her to calm down and become the healer that she became. So, and I also think getting in touch with our archetypal story is hugely important. So how do we all get in touch with our archetypal story so that we can transmute it? Because unless we bring that awareness, it's impossible to transmute.
Yes.
So bringing the awareness, the kindness, the compassion to ourselves and also to others, because there's many times I'm like, can people not see what I see? And I then get angry, and that doesn't serve anybody. It doesn't serve me, and it doesn't serve anybody. So having the patience to protect the candle and still hold it and still march with that candle and walk with that candle and be with that candle to to serve humanity. And for me, it's about serving humanity and serving the planet. And how do we all, my personal aim is to be a healthy muse for love, wisdom, power, and service to humanity and the planet. So every day I call myself, how do I be that? How do I be more of that? And in a way that's still loving and kind to myself, because ultimately underneath the anger, there's hatred. There is underneath the anger, there is pain. Underneath the anger, there is bitterness. Underneath the anger, there's a lot. When you look at underneath the covers of my anger, there's a lot there. So there's a lot of words I'd use to describe underneath the covers. So for me, it's like, okay, getting those words out to really, for me, investigate them and what do they mean and how do I transmute them so that they are who I want to be. And I think so many people are not deliberate with their attention. They let the ego, they let their default run away with it, whether it be anger, image, or anxiety. And how do we transmute it? By being more deliberate with our sense of self and also our awareness. And Gurdjieff spoke a lot about that. And I think to pay attention to where we're putting our attention. So for example, we have 80,000 thoughts a day. 80% are repeating and 85% of those are negative. So what are we feeding ourselves? And the invitation for us all to feed ourselves good food.
Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, there's so many things I can speak to right now. One of the things that came up for me as you talked about like anger, image, and essentially you said like anxiety, for those newer to the Enneagram who are listening, folks have overlaid those three sort of like core feelings to the Enneagram types, right? The body types being anger, the heart types 2, 3, 4 being image oriented, and the head type being anxiety oriented or fear oriented as a default. Not to say that we don't all have like all three, but it is kind of helpful to know, as you shared earlier, Catherine, for those who are newer, who are eights, we're like, oh, there's something about this core, this relationship to anger that does need to be transmuted. And as you put it so beautifully, it's just a layer that like beneath which are these often sensitive and vulnerable, like feelings like hurt, and other like uncomfortable ways of relating to the world, like hatred, as you named. And there's a possibility when we encounter the Enneagram for it to be, as you say, a portal into that interiority that allows us to have this greater freedom, as you shared. When I teach the Enneagram, I'm like, we're not trying to not be our types. We're trying to just have freedom from the fixation, from that default, because we want to be able to tap into the strengths of your number when it's appropriate, when it's skillful, when the soul yearns to express in exactly that way, right? But there's no choice when we're fixated in type. And so opening that portal, beginning a healing of all that lies beneath the surface of our persona, right? Which is the Enneagram type. And then have that treasure be our gift to the world, right? Like the beauty of what you just described there is just so exciting. And it is, as you say, there's like a diligence, right? Because we never leave our types, like we stay, as evolved as people become, the default's still there. And there's a diligence of gentle attention that you described around just attention this way, in rather than outward, right? And so that which expresses outward can be sort of purified, right? Not from the old Christian, like you were sinful bad, but like purified in its intentionality, in its like original truth, as like the core. And my understanding is that the core of the 8, I mean, the 8 with its natural line to 2, there's a core in there that I have felt in every 8 that feels so innocent to me, that feels so precious, and like the gift of that in the world when it's not guarded by the 8's armor. It's like, "Ah, fix you," like, "Ah," and doesn't look down, because the 8's orientation is, we got to change that, not we've got to transmute this inside. And then this inside is the strongest thing to transform and heal that outer world, so super exciting to hear.
What you just described was so exquisite. And the way you articulated it was so, so beautiful. And this inner and outer collision to transmute who we are, I think we need to pay real attention to. So in terms of, I think that the context is continually giving us and informing us in incredible ways. And how are we paying attention to context, to nurture and feed our souls, and for everybody to pay attention to what's around us, because we're getting signs and signals from the universe all the time. Like, there's no doubt, there's no accident in terms of why you and I are speaking today, and there's no accident. So I reached out to her just before she let people know that she's being published, which is so exciting. And I just had this feeling about you.
Oh.
And there was all these kind of signs to me, and I'm like, I need to reach out and to connect and to meet her. And so I think for us to pay attention to the divine signs that are everywhere for us. And are we being receptive enough to receive them? And then also, not only to receive, to activate. So it's a dance between the two for me, with the 8. It's for me, to become, how would I put it? I would put it, how do I yield to love? How do I yield to love? How do I yield to what is loving, and paying attention more to the backside of my body, because that's the backside of our bodies is the more receptive side. So how do we kind of yield to love and yield to being and what's being called for all of us? And then there's some people, it's like, how do I activate, which would be more the front side of our body, to come forward, like the 4, 5, 9, to come forward, right, versus yielding.
Yes.
It's understanding what our dance is.
Yes. And I love that word, yield. I haven't used it before, and I will now start, by the way, but I've often told, assertive types like you and me, 3 and 8, that like there's a posture of reclining. When we think about resting in spirit, you're not actually reclining. It just feels like it. Compared to this forward. And for those, who are just listening, not watching, I'm like leaning forward. If the natural orientation, or the default, I'll say, orientation is leaning forward, when you do the gesture of reclining, usually you're just sitting upright. You're not even reclining, but it feels like it, because of the way the muscle has been sort of built and oriented toward that forward and outer movement, right? So to yield, that feels very similar in its energy around, that, again, receptivity. It's an allowing of life to move forward. And I do have a question related to that, because earlier, because so I have a lot of 8s, who would come, and they're like, there's this thing about making things happen, right? That can be the egoic orientation, right? Even like, I'm going to transmute it versus like, this is transmuted, right? By what? And I see you nodding. So I'll just let you in here and go, like, what does that look like to allow for the transmutation?
That's a great question. To allow for the transmutation, it's resting and being. Like, it's just, for me, sometimes it's as simple as putting my shoulders down to rest, to just rest in the ground of being, so that the ground of being literally becomes me. And to not have the forward, my energy is so naturally like, and I love the way you said sitting back, because there's something about that, to just rest in the ground of being. That also, it's really not me there's another energy that drops in. However, it is me the activating choice, in terms of making a commitment to do this, making a commitment to practice, making a commitment. That's an activating force. And the reception and the relaxation and the transmutation happens in practice. And for me, the mantra actually has had, I think, a very powerful impact on me. And I don't think I believed that at the beginning of being an under. I think it had some impact, however, not as big as it's been. It's been very, very clarifying. And in many ways, practice itself is a transmutation. So I believe anyone, when we sit down in prayer or do contemplation, that is an act of, that is a powerful act. That's a transformative act. And it's also so counterculture, because we're just taught to produce, and at what cost? Like the relentless pursuit of more, for what? I think everybody should ask themselves. When I wrote The Awakening Company, I interviewed somebody called Joel Solomon, and he does renewable energy funds, and said people have to ask themselves, how much is enough? And I think that's such a powerful question. How much is enough? And what do we really need? And to just, for me, it's just to drop all the stuff that doesn't really matter. And what matters is my connection to other people and to the planet and to nature, and to have hopefully a freaking positive impact.
Yeah. Beautiful. Yeah, so beautiful. There are a few things that have come up for me as you've been sharing that I want to not neglect here. One is to go all the way back for a second to your mention of the signs in life. I know you mentioned that the birds came and you noticed. So it wasn't just that the birds arrived, it's that you noticed. And that's what I meant earlier. There's a subtlety, right? There's a paying attention. And birds are small things, right? Like receptivity makes you available for a giftedness that isn't as available. I even liken it to, if I'm going by on a bike, like there's a whirl of like the trees, there's a speed, right? And so I can see the trees, but not really. But if I walk the same path, if I'm slower, I see the leaves on the tree, right? Like there's an attention, there's a detail, life has gifted you with this. It was always there, right? But it's the building of this receptivity. And I think that's so important, I think, for any 8, especially listening to hear, or any assertive type, really. But there is something about that quality. And oh gosh, there's so many things. And I guess the other thing is simply, you talked about, the contemplative practice that I teach in the Enneagram. And this is, a gathering of multiple teachers. So this is not original to me. But the invitation of 8s in particular is to consent to stillness. The posture, the contemplative posture is consent. Why? Because there's no way anything's happening if you don't say yes. Like there's nothing, you're not being controlled, right? The consent is that opening. And so, but the consent opens to things that are beyond your wildest dreams, right? Like, okay, you might be like, okay, I trust you, teacher. I don't even believe this mantra stuff. Not really. But if I kind of trust you, I might consent to like doing this. And that consent opens up giftedness that I did not previously Like I couldn't have found that myself, if you will. I couldn't have strived to like read a book or figure that, like there's something about the way that happens even that creates an opening, right?
Mhm.
So consenting to stillness is just really fascinating that like that happens to be the posture, you know, that I teach from the this contemplative Christian, mystical Christian path. Yeah. So
That's just, it's so, I love the way you use the word consent. And I think once the consent begins, in many ways, there's no stopping it, because then another force comes in.
mm,
It is far more, it's been far more powerful than I am.
wow.
And so, well, I love your word consent, because it's almost like, you know, yes, that the window in me needed to be opened a little bit. And now the window is like fully open.
Wow.
And it's just receiving, um, and being in that very strong river
Mm,
of guidance, and paying attention to that guidance. And I'm not gonna say I always love it. I resist it. I absolutely resist it. So for me, it's just this continual unfolding is, how do I yield? How do I yield? How do I yield? And in that yielding, I actually become uh, more positively impactful.
mm.
So it's kind of counterintuitive. You know, you think that I would think, oh, I got to make this happen. No, something else is going to make this happen. Like something else brought us together. Mm.
Amazing.
So how do I yield to that? How do I receive that? And how do I live that? For me, ultimately, it's how we live.
Mm,
And I think that that's something, there's a knowing doing gap, I really do feel, in our, in many communities. And it's like, how do we actually bring the work of the Enneagram to life in a real way? And I'm really, really excited by your upcoming book, by what you're doing, because I have a feeling it will really help people to bring it to life. And that's ultimately what the Enneagram's about, is bringing this ancient wisdom so that we can be more full humans, uh, and have the kind of impacts that are so needed at this time in our society.
mm. Yeah.
Um, yeah.
This reminds me earlier when you were talking, one of my favorite quotes from A Course in Miracles is essentially that a universal theology is impossible, but a universal experience is not only possible, but necessary. And these multitude of practices, right? I identify as an interspiritual unity minister. The multitude of practices that can point, like the finger pointing at the moon, right? That can point toward an actual experience of love, of the divine, by whatever name, of light, of inner wisdom, of inner strength, that then fortifies each of us in the different way that we are uniquely gifted and suited, right, to bring forth like us, our own brand of wholeness into the world, right, is so exciting. And I want to say that I didn't even mention your book earlier. You referenced the book. I brought up that you are the founder of the Awakened Company, but also everybody go get the book. I actually have ordered it. So it's by the same name, right? The Awakened Company is your book. And I know you were referencing my Enneagram book yet to come out, but I've got my publisher and it's in the works. So it'll be on the Enneagram of Soul. That's the working title. And yeah, so just more of just different paths and different pointers and different teachers to support the vast spectrum of people, I think, yearning. You and I, Catherine, have talked briefly about some of the struggles of the world. I definitely feel also the yearning of that inmost aspect of being to express itself as well, right, in the midst of the struggles of the world, yearning in everyone, and to offer light beams, to support one another in coming out, I think is part of the way right now, right? And so related to that, I would love to ask you, if you have something else to share, I want to open space for that too, but I would love to ask you if you have advice for the young 8 sojourner, who is questing, if anything, to consent, right? Open to the journey. What would that be?
Oh, I have a lot of guidance. So this is another great question. Number one is to physically be in your body and move your body every day. So because when I physically haven't moved, my anger actually is far greater. So every day I do something physical, whether I just got off a lake, just paddleboarded around an island. And it can just be also as simple as some basic yoga or going for a little walk, just something to be in your body. Number two, pay attention to your senses. So your sense of sight, hearing, smell, taste, feeling. Bring yourself back home when you feel that red energy by doing that. Invitation. Number three would be to have surround yourself with people who can tell you when to stop. When people who will meet your energy, like Russ Hudson will be like, okay, enough of the fire breathing dragon. He doesn't use fire breathing dragon, but my tennis instructors do. My tennis instructors like, we need the fairy, not the fire breathing dragon. But to have people who can mirror and who can stand toe to toe with you, incredibly, incredibly important. Number four, this should actually be number one. It would be to have a practice, have a sitting practice, have a contemplative practice. Be still, be still, be still. Come back home. Consent to what she just said. Consent, 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 consent. And it's really, at first when I did it, I was all twitchy and I didn't really want to, because I have a huge furnace of energy. And it's like, okay. And I was burning myself out a lot. So no, come back home, come back home, come back home. What else would I say in terms of good practices for 8? I kinesthetically have to write a lot of things down. And that really helps me to process, is to physically be in the body and to write things down. So that's another thing I would suggest. I would suggest also doing whatever it is that makes you feel more grounded, more centered, more whole, more in your heart, and more thoughtful. I love the Viktor Frankl quote. It says something like between
stimulus and response. Yeah.
Space, and in that space is the power and freedom to choose. And even that language of power and freedom to choose for the 8, that. And give yourself 24 hours and don't just be on autopilot and spew the fire out everywhere. Don't, because it wrecks relationships and it's just not worth it. So is that enough? That's a lot of suggestions. There's a little lusty suggestion box for you. There's the and the thing is, I could keep going.
Hilarious, because the final thing I wanted to say was actually about your comment about enoughness. So it's pretty funny, but that is plentiful.
Enough. It's just enough. Just enough.
But great. I mean, I love the orientation toward the visceral, aspects, the sensation and all that, and how it feels compassionate, because it feels like it honors where 8s are already by default oriented, right? So with that said, I'd like to say that we could close with a sense of enoughness. And as you were sharing earlier, Catherine, about, as you were talking about like what's enough, I really find value in systems where we just sit in reflection on a question like that. like that. It's a rhetorical question, but I think if you sit with a question like, what's enough? Like there's something that then, right? Like, what's enough? That offers a salve for the historic egoic orientation often used to describe eightness, which is, if a little is good, more is better. And the salve, what is enough? So, how about this moment? How about what we've said? How about I do this with the sevens too, and you have a strong seven. So,
60% 8, 40% 7. It's
yeah. It's so enough. Yeah. So, but as we close our time, I would love to invite you to share a reading or writing that touches or inspires you, that we can close as a benediction of this time. Yeah.
Thank you for that invitation. And as you know, I write thousands of poems, and I believe that life and love really is poetry. It's if we can really see it, if we can really experience it. So here's a very brief poem that I wrote after spending some time in the Rocky Mountains in Banff. And it was just some time alone, and it was so nurturing. And it's a very brief poem. It's called Whispers. Whisper secrets to me in the water. Sing songs to me over the wind. Release things not meant for me into the fire. Let my feet meet the earth with rhapsody. And may space fill me, sweep me, and fill my heart with love. Let's be love beyond love together now.
Wow. Wow. Thank you so much, Catherine. I'm so grateful for your time, for your presence, for your poetry, for your service as a muse to the world. So, with that, thank you, everyone. Bye, everybody. I'm sure we'll be back.
Bye, everybody. And how gorgeous you are inside and out. I'll just say it. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And thank you for bringing it to life.
Enough.